Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV, a podcast about television. I am David Chen.
I'm Roxana Hadadi.
Welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing the White Lotus Season 2, Episode 7, entitled Arrivederci. White Lotus Season 2, Episode 7, the Season 2 finale. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Email us at decodingtv@gmail.com, which many of you did this last season, and we are so grateful for those emails. And find us on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram at Decoding TV. Now, before we get into today's episode, Roxana, there's a bunch of announcements, stuff I have to share, etc. So stick with me, folks. First of all, I know, like, during the course of the season, it's obvious from the emails at decodingtv@gmail.com, like, a lot of people have been enjoying this podcast, engaging with with both the White Lotus and this podcast, and we're really grateful for that. There is going to be one additional bonus episode of this podcast, and at this point, I think it's going to be a bonus episode available for paid subscribers at decodingtv.com. Now, you might be asking, what's decodingtv.com? Decoding TV makes money in two ways. One is through advertising, but most of the money that the podcast network makes comes from paid subscribers at decodingtv.com. And we are incredibly grateful for people who pay for a subscription at decodingtv.com. Every person I work with, Roxana, everyone else, I pay out of the money that we make at decodingtv.com. And so if you want to support podcasts like this one and keep it going long into the future, decodingtv.com, become a paid member, get access to ad-free episodes, exclusive bonus episodes, as well as early access to episodes, again, by becoming a paid member at decodingtv.com. Thank you so much for those who do that. And I do want to say, Roxana, this completes, other than the bonus episode, this basically completes our first run together at Decoding TV. This is our first kind of ongoing podcast that we've ever done together. And I do just want to say a big thank you to Roxana for taking a chance on Decoding TV. This has been so much fun. It's been so fascinating to hear from you. And also, it's just been really fun to disagree with you on virtually every single thing about the show.
Agreed.
So thank you, Roxana. I want to give a big thank you to Roxana. And if you're in the audience, you can, be thanking, just as you were screaming at your phone a couple weeks ago when I missed a detail, quote unquote detail from the show. Now you can be saying thank you at your phone. And be sure to also tweet at Roxana and say thank you for her participation as well. But the one other way you can share your thanks is by becoming a paid member at decodingtv.com. But Roxana, thank you. It's been such a blast, and we hope to bring you back again very soon. So
thank you. Very much same.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to say about announcing things, which is that people are probably curious, like, what shows are we going to be covering in the future? What show is the Decoding TV podcast going to be covering in the future? And I want to preemptively announce the next show that we'll be covering right now. Usually I wait until the show actually comes out, but we are actually about a month away from the next show that we're going to cover. I am pleased to announce that the next show that Decoding TV will be covering is The Last of Us, which is going to be premiering on HBO in mid-January. Keep subscribed to Decoding TV to get our announcement episode later this week or in the next week or two. It'll be coming out, and you will also find out who my co-host is for that podcast. But Decoding TV will be covering The Last of Us. It's going to be really exciting. The pedigree behind that show is excellent, so I'm really looking forward to both watching that show on TV, The Last of Us, and also podcasting about it here on Decoding TV. Finally, last week on the podcast, we put out a call for all of your theories as to what was going to happen this week on the White Lotus. And lots of people sent in theories, and we really appreciate those. Those were super fun to read. There were two big things that people mentioned last week, like in the last week over emails, that I just wanted. Many people wrote this in, so I just wanted to get this off my chest right off the top of the show. Which is, number one, many people speculated that the reason why Quentin and, as we know now, Greg were trying to hook Tanya up with Niccolo was to get her to cheat on Greg, and that there might be some kind of clause in the prenup that would dissolve the marriage if she cheated on Greg, or allow Greg to unlock some money if she cheated on him. That felt more plausible to me than a murder scheme,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately we found out the murder scheme was accurate on this episode of the show. So, but lots of people guessed that. I thought it was a pretty good theory myself. I was like, wish we had mentioned that on the podcast, but it
I
turned
think
out not to be true.
I think the only thing that sort of gave me a little bit of hesitance about that is like we also know that Greg was cheating, so part of me thinks wouldn't Tanya have the resources to like combat that by also figuring out that Greg had cheated?
Do we know that Greg was cheating? Is the question,
I
Roxana?
mean, I think the phone calls pretty heavily
A lot of
imply
people think the
that.
phone call is with Quentin.
Doesn't he say,
He say,
doesn't Greg say, I love you in the phone call?
"Oh, I don't remember that. I remember him saying
I
like
remember him saying, like,
she doesn't
looking forward.
she doesn't suspect anything." That's kind of what I
Yeah,
remember.
I remember him saying something like, she's clueless per usual. And I also thought that he said something about, like, being excited to see you soon. But I also thought he said, love you on the phone call, which again,
Well,
he
again,
could have been having an affair
maybe
with
it's
Quentin.
is with
I don't
Quentin,
know.
or if not, maybe it's a brotherly love that he has with Quentin.
Right. And yeah, so there are a lot of possibilities here. It's just, I sort of thought that, like, the smoking gun of getting Tanya on videotape, like if Tanya is
Yeah,
still alive, I could see her fighting that.
and the way yeah, I don't think it's definitive at all that Greg was cheating per se.
Right.
But I also think that like the way last episode was shot, and how kind of like there's a dolly shot that kind of pulls out slowly at the end, really does make it feel like, oh, is she being watched in someone? There's something consequential to this event in a way that we kind of find out in this episode wasn't really the case. So,
Right.
uh, so anyway, that was a great theory, but it
Mhm.
ended up not being true. Uh, Last episode, I wondered if we had actually seen Cam's penis on the show.
Mhm.
I was like, I don't remember seeing Cam's penis. I remember there being maybe some side dick, but not like a full on frontal Cam's penis shot. And a lot of
Mhm.
people wrote in to say we did see Cam's penis,
Mhm.
but it was prosthetic. It wasn't actually that actor's penis.
Right. It
Um,
was not Theo James. Like it
in a
was, but it wasn't.
like it was not his dick. It was a prosthetic dick. And I have a horrible confession to make, which is that in addition to struggling with Mendelian genetics, I also have dick blindness.
Apparently, yeah.
I can't. I don't remember when I've seen dicks. And also, by the way, as made clear on our bonus episode last night, butts. I got Alby's butt confused with Ethan's butt. My wife said she actually made the same mistake because their hair is kind of the same. It's kind of curly.
Hmm. Okay.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, Ethan's butt is not the same as Alby's butt, and I regret the error. So
I
I
feel
wanted
it's
to
very
clear that.
interesting to me that like in a season full of male nudity, it has all like not made an impact on you.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Hey, no,
Uh
there is a big Nicholas full frontal, and that was I acknowledge
yeah.
that. So yeah.
Yeah. How could we not?
I would say artful male nudity hasn't made it a bit. It's too subtle for me, Roxana. Okay, so we got a bunch of emails writing in theories, and I wanted to share like some of the theories and some of
Mhm.
the things that people had like figured out
Mhm.
before we get into the events of this episode. Okay,
Yeah.
so these were all at decodingtv@gmail.com. And I do want to say, by the way, our mailbag episode, like our bonus episode next week, will be like mailbag. We'll also talk about like other writing and interviews that have happened around the show in the last week. So decodingtv@gmail.com, or just comment at decodingtv.com. We'd love to discuss your feedback and thoughts. Francesca from Phoenix writes this, and she kind of broke down what she thought would happen this episode. So these were all these were written before the episode aired. Why am I sharing these? Because I actually think they're fun and interesting. Um, Francesca from Phoenix writes, with regards to the Lucia and DeGrasso storyline, I 100% agree with you, Albies and Mark. I think watching the first scene with Lucia in the first episode solidifies it. When she meets up with Mia on the road, they pass by Alessio. Lucia yells out in Italian, "Hey, Alessio, see you later," in a very friendly and casual manner. Not at all how you greet your pimp. So it seems he is a friend or ex or brother, but they definitely have to be working together to scam Alby and the rest of the DeGrasso family to get their money. I'll pause here and say I think that ends up being accurate, and I think we
Yeah.
see Alessio at the end again,
Yeah.
in for friendly terms. Okay,
Mhm.
Francesca continues. Daphne and the supposed trainer's baby. The theory about the baby being the trainer's and not Cam's has been circulating. And while I think it's a great theory, and it may be possible, I think that takes away from what Daphne is trying to convey to Harper during that conversation. Whether or not it's the trainer's baby, I think she is telling Harper to do whatever it takes to stay in her relationship, either by cheating on Ethan, having a baby, doing whatever Harper needs to do. Love the ambiguity of Daphne's point, and it adds so much complexity to her character, which makes her all the more compelling. To me, it doesn't matter whether the baby is the trainer's or Cam's. She's being self sufficient and is not victimizing herself, which speaks so much. I think the theory is only reducing her character and stripping the layers away from her complexity. I feel that Mike White has left it ambiguous on purpose, and it adds so much more if it was kept this way. End quote. Uh, People may disagree on that, but I thought it's a great point that like I do think theory, like fan theories like this, have the potential to be reductive or flattening. You know, they can be like, oh, it's just this twist, as opposed to like, think about what the emotional like complexity that's being conveyed is there. In this case, there is a lot of emotional complexity with the baby not being Cam's, but I take the point in general, and I agree with it. And I think that it is in fact ambiguous. It's not. It's probably the case that it's not her. It's not Cam's kids, and we see like we talked last night on the bonus podcast about like Cam potentially realizing and recognizing these are not her kids. Um, but I think it's ambiguous. Any further thoughts on that, Roxana?
Well, just that I think like Daphne doing what she wants is also so clear in this episode if we're meant to
Yeah.
think that she and Ethan sleep together. So it's very interesting to have this character who puts herself first, and then you see the contrast with Harper at the end of the day, right? Like I think if we're to believe that Harper was like purposefully being confusing with Ethan about what happened with Cam, then it's sort of like Daphne is like a master level at this kind of thing, and Harper just doesn't seem to have it like in her to be that person. So it
Mm-hmm.
does make Daphne more complex and fascinating and sort of proves that like Harper can't get there. So I like that contrast. It doesn't really matter who the father of the kid is.
Yeah.
It doesn't really
Or
change
at
how
least it's
Daphne approaches her life.
great point. Great points all around. I think we'll return to that Harper
Yeah.
point later. But yeah, I think it works either way. I think it's purposely left ambiguous
Mhm.
in my opinion. There
Mhm.
were also some people debating whether or not Daphne is actually blonde this week, and I do think she is blonde, but you know, uh, I will let other people who are smarter than that weigh in on that. Smarter about that weigh in on that. Okay, a couple of other emails at decodingtv@gmail.com. I think Tanya, Pat B writes, quote, I think Tanya paid for the experience as some kind of fantasy. Like all the mystery and murder is a ruse she paid for at Portia's psychological expense. The money Quentin is coming into is the large sum Tanya paid for the experience. My big prediction, though, is that Alby has a girlfriend in the US. When Lucia finds out, she gets so mad, and Alby somehow falls off a cliff, in some way decapitating him. Also, Dom is there and falls in after him. Bert has died while swimming from a concussion and is the body that Daphne finds. Uh, End quote. That extremely elaborate email, none of which came true, as far
Okay,
as I can
but
tell.
Pat B should have a soap opera writing job because those
Yes.
are amazing theories.
Amazing theories. Amazing
Yeah.
theories. Love that whole thing.
And I will say that Pat B is not necessarily wrong about like the immersive quality of what happens to Tanya. Like
Mm-hmm.
Tanya chasing experiences is part of her character. So I think
Totally.
there's some solid
Oh yeah,
intuitive
I mean,
thinking there.
all these struck me as pretty plausible.
Yeah.
Rosa writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. I agree that Alby is Lucia's mark. My prediction is Dom, in his attempt to do something noble, somehow kills Alessio, even if accidentally, in his attempt to unnecessarily defend Lucia and his son. Bert learns the truth from Lucia, or maybe from Mia, and pays her off. Neither Dom nor Alby ever learned the truth of what each other's father did, continuing the family's pattern of keeping secrets from each other around sex workers, but maybe Dom tells Laura Dern about it. The other death probably comes from the Villa gays, but I'm not sure how or why. As you said, it takes place back in the White Lotus. End quote. I like this idea of like the deaths being caused by the DeGrassos in some way as kind of an overreaction to, you know, trying to be chivalrous. That struck me as a pretty cool idea. That obviously none of that happened, but
I
anyway, I
also
still like that idea. Yeah.
But I like that idea too because it suggests that maybe the DeGrassos would somehow be affected by anything that happened in this failed motherland trip, and they just weren't. Like, right? Like they got like yelled at by the relatives. They traveled across the world to see, and like none of them seems to care. Like Bert
Well,
makes a joke out of it, right?
yeah. I think we did get an email or a tweet or some a comment. I don't remember, but like somebody sharing like how powerful the Burt scene was last week. Like,
Yeah, which I
uh,
think it was.
the idea that it's kind like that Bert is like truly alone. He has been commenting all season on like how there's no place in modern society for an old person like him, and now like in his outmoded way of thinking, he thinks he will be welcomed in by his female uh relatives when he comes home, and he's instead rejected. And it's like he's already lost his wife, he already like alienates a lot of women in his life. Like these were kind of the last people that he thought would, what was it, the phrase he used was like the warm embrace of a woman, or something
Yeah,
along
like
those lines, or
homecoming is a
the
warm
yeah
embrace. Yeah.
yeah and that he lost that was like a huge kind of loss, and makes him one of the most tragic characters in the season. So yes, none of them died, but they still lost $50,000, and
Which is nothing to them.
and Alby got mildly rejected. We'll talk about that later. Anyway,
Yeah.
but I like the idea of like, oh, basically, I'm reading you emails, listeners, that like really got my imaginary, like my imagination, my creativity flowing. You know what I'm saying?
There was another
Um,
email as well that pointed out like from and I appreciated this as someone whose parents like go back to their home country and bring gifts. How are you going to go visit these relatives and you're not bringing them any gifts?
okay, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah,
That's like
that's terrible.
that's yeah. I mean, now we understand why they kicked him out.
Yeah, like what
So
the hell? Yeah.
finally, Wall O, did I write that correctly? Wall O writes, The Godfather is mentioned throughout White Lotus season 2. Throughout the Godfather movies, oranges appear whenever someone is about to be shot or die. Vito is playing with an orange peel and his grandson in the tomato garden. Tessio is seen holding an orange at the opening wedding scene. Don Fanucci buys an orange during the festival before he's murdered in Godfather 2. Mike White would be well aware of this device used in the Godfather films, and in the White Lotus has substituted pineapples for oranges. We
And in the
see
first movie, Vito is buying oranges at the fruit stand when they attempt to assassinate him, and it's the bag of
mm,
oranges that falls out of his hand when
yes.
Fredo like runs to his side. So yeah.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
example. That probably the most memorable one. Mike White would be well aware of this device used in the Godfather films, and in the White Lotus, he has substituted pineapples for oranges. We see three people in episode 6 consuming pineapples. First, at the breakfast at the Palazzo, Quentin walks into the room and asks, "Who wants pineapple mimosas?" Portia responds with yes, and Tanya says, "Oh sure." Portia seems to be eating some kind of fruit slices for breakfast, which may or may not be pineapple. There's also orange slices at the table too, which I think is Mike White's way of connecting the two fruits. Separately, at the beach, after Cam, Harper, and Ethan come back from the rooms, Harper is drinking a pina colada with a pineapple slice. She offers it to Ethan, who refuses it. After their argument, there's a lingering shot of her rather angrily eating the pineapple slice. Both moments seem a little out of pace and a lot of out of place and slightly out of pace, as if they're put in for dramatic effect. I see this as a clue from Mike White. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading this morning. That Tanya and Portia are going to be murdered. Other guests who were killed, and Harper is the killed that morning and is the body that Daphne finds in the ocean. End quote. Um, so Tanya was definitely one of the people that was killed. Portia and Harper were not. Um, but there was a lot of theorizing that Daphne would be the one doing the murdering, and that would make the opening scene even more chilling. Of her being like, "Hey guys, I'm just having fun. Like, let's go in the water. Oh my gosh, body that I created." I like that, but that didn't end up happening. But yeah, anyway, I thought I just think it's fun when people kind of read these things into it, even though this ended up not really being true. End quote. So yeah, not end quote. I don't know why I said that just now. I'm really loopy this morning, Roxana. Anyway, any other thoughts on people's? I sent you all the theories that people sent in. Any other
Mhm.
thoughts before we dive into the actual episode?
I don't think so. I think we covered a good amount of them. We'll probably talk about others in our bonus episode. But I think people did. I still am very impressed by the people who guessed at Greg's connection
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
really thought it would just be like Greg's cheating and then he like exits stage left. But that did not turn out to be the case.
There was also an online meme or people pointing out that Tanya's dress is extremely similar to the dress worn by the woman in the car that gets blown up in The Godfather.
So it's
Um,
not actually what she wears in the movie, but it's what they put on the dummy at the tourist exhibit.
oh
In the
yes,
movie, she's wearing like a blue dress. But yes, it's
gotcha.
similar
Yes,
to the Apollonia dummy and how she's dressed when Portia goes to the
yes,
attraction. Yeah.
yes. So another clue for you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into it. Season 2, episode 7, Arrivederci. We discussed our overall thoughts last night on a bonus episode, and I overall really liked the episode. I thought it was well put together. I think upon further reflection, there were some issues with I think back to all the characters this season, and probably about a quarter to a third of them, I thought the show didn't really give us quite enough to work with. But that still means that 2/3 of the characters were pretty well done, in my opinion, pretty well drawn. And I end up thinking like the show is a big success. Like it ended up being really compelling watching for me. I wanted to find out what happened to all these people, and millions of people on the internet around the country also did as well. So like I still think the second season was a success, albeit not quite as clean as the first season. Roxana, now that you've had 12 hours to marinate on it since we recorded our bonus episode, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on any overall thoughts before we dive into the plots.
I mean, I think I'm still mixed. I think I probably still am where you are. I think you might be more glass half full and I'm slightly more glass half empty. I just think looking back on it, this season felt more driven by the themes that Mike White wanted to touch on more than the characters that he was crafting.
Mm.
And we'll talk about this when we get to the section, but sometimes, especially with like the Ethan, Harper, Cam, Daphne scenario, I felt like Cam and Ethan never had the depth I wanted them to have. It felt like Harper and Daphne felt more sketched out, but overall, it felt like they were in service of this like infidelity, what does it do to you story. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I just think there were bigger questions here, and Mike White was a little bit more interested in tossing out big questions than in letting like specific individuals drive the story forward. So that's sort of like where the mixed reaction comes from for
Yeah,
me.
I think those are great points. I think though that the season 2 finale was just really well done from a thriller perspective because you're kind of guessing who are the people that are going to die the whole episode. It's kind of like almost to the point where it's like winking at the camera as to like, hey, is this person gonna die? Is maybe this person? Maybe Cam's gonna drown underneath the water, like, or maybe it's gonna be Ethan that drown. Like who knows? Uh, and for me, I was really guessing all the way to the end, and that's fun. Now I don't know how that's gonna feel on subsequent viewings, but overall, I had a lot of fun with the season finale. On further reflection, I'm like, you know what? The Lucia and Mia stuff really didn't work that well. And also, the Valentina plotline, I would argue, is almost a disaster. Like, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's start with a relatively simple resolution for these plots, or for their characters. And that's the DeGrasso men. So, the final morning of the vacation, Alby vows to help Lucia. And she says, I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you the money that you need. He then approaches Dom about transferring 50,000 euros to his bank account.
Wild.
Um, and they have an argument and about it because Dom obviously doesn't want to part with $50,000. And Alby says, "Hey, I want you to do this for me. Consider it karmic payment for being a huge asshole. And BT Dubs, I'll help you out with Mom, aka Laura Dern's voice, aka someone else's photo that is not Laura Dern." So curious why he is why Mike White used this person that's Laura Dern's voice but not Laura Dern's face.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
saw Alan Sepinwall speculate maybe because that character might come back in a future season. We'll see. But and they know they probably won't be able to get Laura Dern for that part. But anyway, we'll see. So I thought this conversation was awesome because it's them acknowledging so many truths about themselves. Like those are my favorite conversations this season, is when the characters acknowledge fundamental truths. Like, we are no longer attracted to each other. I'm going to ask you for $50,000. You're a mark, Alby. I'm okay with being a mark. Like all those things, like all that stuff comes out, and it's all very interesting in my opinion. Roxana, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this conversation in particular, I think you saw sort of the growth that each character has gone through during this trip. Like, Albie felt very mature in this conversation in a way that I don't think he did in previous discussions with Dom or with Bert. It felt like he had a clear end goal. He knew what would cause his father to sort of crack under pressure, right? Like, he knew what to bargain. And that felt intelligent and well thought out for Albie. And then on the other hand, I'm like, I guess 50,000 really is nothing because there really isn't like a serious negotiation about the money. There's more negotiation, I think, about Dom, thinking like,
He's like $10,000.
how is my son going to go through life if he's this gullible?
Yes,
Which I
yes,
which I think is a valid concern.
completely.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
does try to say like, how about 10 grand? I could easily part with 10 grand, but yeah, I agree with you that the money is really not an issue because Albie points out correctly that 50 grand is nothing to him. So it
Yeah.
doesn't really
And
make a huge difference.
the other thing, and this, I don't know, this might be me just having wanted like more soapy type stuff, is there's part of me that wishes that like Lucia had blackmailed Dom and told him like if he didn't pay up, she would tell Albie about their relationship. There's part of me that sort of wishes that like Lucia had slightly more interactions with Dom because I thought that was an interesting. I mean, we argued about it. We got tons of emails about it, right? Like about the nature of that triangular relationship. So I sort of wish we had gone back to that
Well,
from Lucia's point.
what's fascinating is we never, yeah, that sort of plot is never resolved, which is that Dom never tells Albie that he slept
Hmm.
with Lucia. So,
Hmm.
which is an interesting move for the show. They're just like, we're just not going to come back to that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, so Dom calls out Albie on spending money he hasn't earned, and Dom calls Albie a mark, which he's offended by. But of course, Albie is a mark, and I think Albie, on some level, from my perspective, knows that he might be a mark, and I think he even says it. He's like, Dom says, "Are you just gonna go like trying to like save every
Save
single
every
girl you meet?" And
woman.
he's like, maybe I will, Dad." And
But see, I didn't think of that as self awareness. I thought of that just as like a child being petulant.
yeah, no, but I think Albie, like when he is revealed to be a mark to himself, like it becomes clear that he's a mark. He's not like, he doesn't break anything, he doesn't kill anyone. Like he's just like, oh, okay, well, that sucked. But I think he knew that it was a possibility the whole time. That's my read on it. Um, Bert arrives at breakfast still with a head wound and says, "I had a dream we went to visit our relatives. They turned out to be a bunch of banshees that chased us out of town." End quote. Do you think? I don't think he's being literal. I thought he was joking in this scene. What do you
I
think?
can't tell.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't tell. I mean, I think he very well could, but on the other hand, and we also got emails about this, Bert has just like had a head wound this whole time.
It's such a weird, like,
Bert is
was it?
concussed.
Did F. Murray Abraham have get surgery or something, or get a mole removed, and that's why they needed to put a bandage on his head?
I don't know.
Like, why? What was the purpose of the head wound? Anyway,
I don't
maybe
know.
he does need medical attention. We'll see.
Hmm.
When we hear that Bert is dead next season
Oh,
because of a
poor
head wound.
Bert. Oh,
Later that evening, Mia hugs Bert, tells him she got the singing job, and then he reveals to Dom and Albie that he got a little bit aroused when she hugged him.
of course he did.
Thanks for sharing that, Bert. Really,
Yeah, Bert's
really needed
back.
to hear about that. But Dom confirms to Albie that he sent the karmic payment, and Albie says, "I already talked to Mom. Everything's gonna be fine." really feels like that whole thing was fixed a little bit too easily, in my opinion, because of
Yeah.
Laura Dern's is just a really effective screamer in the first episode with Dom, and I'm like, really, would one conversation with Alby have gotten her, her on his good side, or vice versa, gotten him on her good side? But whatever, I accept it. Alby bails on dinner, goes to meet Lucia and tell her to check her bank account, and she spends the night with him. And then, there's a call between Dom and his wife, and she doesn't completely tell him to get off the phone immediately, which is huge win for him. She's like,
Right. She tells him to call back when he's in the States.
call
Which
back
is
when
like
you're
an
in the
open
States.
door.
Yeah. So then the next day, Lucia gets up from bed with Alby and leaves. Alby wakes up, sees her gone, realizes that he's been played. At the airport, all three generations of men turn around to look at an attractive woman walking by. The DeGrassos, generational trauma passed down from one generation to the next.
Is it trauma? I mean,
Well,
isn't it?
it's trauma, and it's also misogyny.
I mean, I hesitate to call it trauma. Yes, partially it's misogyny. I just think it's like learned masculinity.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All of the above could be true. But anyway, Portia sees Alby, walks up to him, basically learns from Alby that Tanya is dead, and that's when they're like, "Hey, do you want to like exchange numbers?" And it's kind of funny. That's a very funny moment. It's like a very like romantic comedy-esque moment.
Yeah, like I didn't expect Portia to like weep for Tanya necessarily, but the speed with which she's like, "Hey, give me your number." But she knows now, right? She had the bad guy. She had the Jack experience, and he almost like killed her. He did abduct her. So now Alby looks pretty good in comparison.
I have a couple of three thoughts on this. Three thoughts on this whole situation. Thought number one, the first two thoughts are things that my wife shared with me about this whole plot line and our conversation about it, Roxana. Thought number one is, boy, I hope Portia likes being on planes, because once she gets home, she's going to be flying right back. Because people are going to have a lot of questions about why a billionaire heiress or 100-millionaire heiress is dead. And Portia was one of the last people to see her alive. So,
and isn't well, I mean, maybe they like got rid of her luggage, right? I mean, I'm trying to think of like, what I'm trying to figure out is how big is the conspiracy? Because Jack certainly makes it seem like there's just like a serious group of like scammers running around, and that they could essentially make Portia disappear. So that's what I can't figure out. Like,
here's what I can't figure out. Why didn't they make Portia disappear? Like
why didn't
would
they
you
just kill her?
Why would you leave a living witness? Like, it doesn't make none of that makes any sense to me.
But I think Jack was supposed to kill her and just didn't.
Okay. Yeah, that's possible.
Yeah.
That's possible. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because of what Quentin says. Did Hades carry her off into the underworld? I think that Jack was supposed to kill her, and then
I see.
changes
Well, there you
his
go.
mind.
The second thing that my wife wanted to share, she wanted me to try to impart this perspective, is that we should not view Jack versus Alby as a binary choice for Portia. Like, or she shouldn't view it that way, right? Like, hey, you don't want to be with the murderous pool boy. That's cool. But that doesn't also mean you need to be with the stuck-up Stanford grad, right? So, but also my wife doesn't really have anything against Alby. It's just like they're clearly not really attracted to each other or right for each other.
No.
All that said, we did get this email hot off the presses this morning, Roxana.
Oh, wow.
I didn't tell you I'm going to be reading this email on the air.
Okay.
At decodingtv@gmail.com.
Oh, I'm so worried now. Okay.
Subject line: Justice for Alby.
Oh,
dear David,
Ugh.
all season long we've been told by certain reviewers that Alby is a fake nice guy, that he's a fake. Okay. That he's a simmering pit of toxicity just under the surface, and that all his mannerisms are a performative act, a facade that will fall away at the soonest perceived slight of inconvenience.
I didn't say that, but okay.
Now that the season is over, I think Alby's owed an apology. He was rejected by Portia. He shrugged it off. He was scammed by Lucia for €50,000, and he shrugged that off too. Plenty of opportunities for Alby to go crazy angry incel guy on us, but he didn't. Dude kept his chill the whole time. So maybe he really is a nice guy, and all his woke feminist stuff wasn't just posturing, and he's
Mm-mm.
really trying to live his life in a less toxic masculine way than his father or grandfather. With the season done, and this probably being the last we see of him, I feel we all need to look back on how Alby was perceived, judged, and demeaned over the last few weeks. I think he might be owed an apology. Thanks so much to you and Roxana for your reviews. It's been a pleasure to watch the show and listen to the two of you dissect and discuss each week afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That's from Azim.
Okay.
So if you're listening to the audio version of this, Roxana was unmoved by Azim's pleas.
Yeah. I'm sorry
Uh,
to
I,
Azim, but I'm
I
not
could
going to
see over video.
apologize.
I, I, I guess I have to say I agree with Azim. Like you've been certainly less on the Alby hate train these last few weeks, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that. But like I am genuinely curious now. Yeah, I think it's completely fine to not like Alby, or he rubs you the wrong way, or he's annoying.
Mhm.
Like those are all fine to me. But to assert that he is somehow like toxic like I also will say that I think it's very understandable for to be annoyed by guys who think they're part of the solution, but they are not really part of the solution. And
Mhm.
I think that's where you fall down on it. Is my guess, and that's completely understandable.
Mhm.
But I personally largely think that Alby has been at worst inoffensive this season. Um, but Roxana, I'm going to give you, that's a very impassioned plea that I thought was very reasonable. I will give you the last word on Alby.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to have the last word on Alby. I think just what I'll say, and this is
Yeah,
sort of this is a little bit of my frustration with this storyline,
yeah.
is I think in the initial episodes, he is set up as someone that we are supposed to judge. I think I
Hmm.
mean I genuinely think that. I think in his
Hmm.
interactions with Portia, we are meant to see that he is like taking these lessons about the kind of man that he does not want to be, and he is wielding them in a specific way, and they're not necessarily artful or graceful, and I think they are awkward and cringy to watch. And I don't think I ever said that he was like an incel. But I do think that he and Portia are both characters who are clearly defined by like not actually knowing what they want and not knowing like what kind of person they want to be. And a little bit of my frustration with this is that Alby gets an arc where he gets to have sex with Lucia, he gets to quote unquote save her. Yes, he turns out to be a mark, but like you said, he doesn't really care. Like there isn't really I don't want to say a comeuppance for Alby because I don't necessarily know if he deserves a comeuppance. But it doesn't feel like Alby gets an experience where he like learns that maybe his behavior was not the best.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to me that we also don't get that for like Cam. This season sort of gives men a pass when it had seemed like the entire season was actually going to be about like punishing men, the Moor's head, like challenging men to think differently about women. And I think that line about how like our Achilles heel is actually an Achilles cock sometimes just felt to me like a shrugging, like boys will be boys sort of acceptance. And I think that's where like the Alby character and some of the other stuff has fallen down for me. This sense that like, well, men are just going to behave like men behave and there's nothing we can do about it. So I don't want to apologize to Alby. I like refuse to do that actually. But yes, I will say certainly that Jack becomes such a horrifying figure that Alby looks fine in comparison.
All right. Well, that was beautifully articulated, Roxana, and I think what is very very clear from our conversations is reasonable people can disagree about Alby, um yeah, I think it's a very reasonable reaction to be annoyed by Alby and you don't like Alby. I think
Mhm.
I think he is relatively innocuous, certainly one of the most innocuous people on the show.
Mhm.
But reasonable people can disagree.
Well,
Um
and I also think it's interesting because I think in the initial episodes, again, I don't think I said Albie was going to become like an incel shooter, but I think Albie gets some of those early indications of like he maybe is not the best at dealing with things that happen against his will, right? Like it sort of seemed like he could also have a little bit of a short temper, but then those qualities get transferred to Ethan really hardcore. And it felt like then Ethan has this turn where
Mm.
he becomes sort of like badgering, harassing, abusive, sort of like unable to see past his own perspective. Um, and so I don't know. Again, it's like I'm not exactly sure. I sort of dislike the gender essentialism, which we've brought up over and over again. But I feel like that Achilles cock line is sort of like a little bit of
The
a
thesis of the show.
flimsy, yeah, just like men are going to be like that. And so I don't necessarily love that. But
Indeed.
Azim, I'm really glad that you enjoyed Alby's arc. I'm sorry that I can't apologize on his behalf. I apologize that I can't apologize.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
DeGrasso storyline,
Yeah.
and those are our thoughts on it for this season. You know, Roxana,
Hmm.
I I have to say that when we have a heated argument on the podcast, it can be a little bit electrifying.
Yes.
And I bring that up because this episode of Decoding TV is brought to you by Nissan. As a pioneer in the electric vehicle space, Nissan is always looking for ways to deliver new, meaningful technologies to EV owners. After all, Nissan has been making EVs since 1947. That is not a typo. And their EVs have now traveled 8 billion miles by Nissan Leaf owners since 2010. 8 billion miles, which is the equivalent of driving to Pluto and back. You think that's electrifying? One of their EVs trekked all the way to the North Pole, and Nissan even tests their EV technology on the Formula E racetrack. But Nissan knows you don't just get an EV for the E. You get a Nissan EV because it makes you feel electric, because it sparks your imagination and ignites something within you. It pins you to your seat and takes your breath away. At least that's what Nissan thinks about designing their EVs like the Nissan Ariya and the Nissan Leaf. It's about creating a thrilling design that electrifies its customers. I love Nissan's focus on creating a thrilling drive and an electrifying life. In today's world, it's so important to look around you, to pay attention, to look for all the tiny ways that life can electrify you. And as I was just talking about, one of the ways in which I get a charge is by doing this podcast with Roxana, debating all of people's opinions on things like Alby, who is going to get murdered in the White Lotus, and so on and so forth. It's such a blast. And that's why I think it's so appropriate that Nissan, who is responsible for so much great EV technology, so many great EV vehicles, they are the sponsor of this episode of Decoding TV. A huge thanks to Nissan for sponsoring us. Nissan, EVs that electrify. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about the other plot lines. You know, there was one statement you made just now that I really wanted to bounce off of. Uh, I do think that like, oh, I remember what I was going to say, Roxana,
Hmm.
about the DeGrassos,
Hmm.
which is that I think that one of the things that happened in White Lotus season 1 was that the status quo was upheld. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I feel like that's also true of this season largely as well.
Yeah.
Except as I made clear in last night's episode, like largely for now, we'll see what happens next season when we find out. Hopefully, we find out more details uh, uh, in passing. But uh, largely, the status quo is upheld. The grifters also won this season. You know, they made
Hmm.
many gains, but I think it's about, you know, the White Lotus in general is part of the themes are about how like the status quo is upheld, and so
Hmm.
the idea that the DeGrasses wouldn't change that much, I think, does fit in with that. So
Hmm.
anyway, let's talk about our favorite storyline: Ethan, Harper, and Cam and Daphne.
Hmm.
So it's that morning. Ethan's still imagining Harper and Cam as having had sex. It's actually really graphic and terrible the way it's happening. It's
Yeah.
like right next to him.
Right next to him. He no
Yeah.
longer has the distance between
Yeah.
himself and the table. It's like in the bed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, there's a scene where Cam like still doesn't want to really talk to his children. Um, does he sense that his children are not his?
At
Perhaps.
least the older child who can talk, who's like calling for daddy, and Cam has no interest.
Well, I think it's, you know, I personally, I know everyone feels that way, like what you just said.
Mhm.
I still think it's ambiguous. He's like picking his teeth, and I don't know about you, Roxana, but when I'm cleaning my teeth, uh, it's a very purposeful activity for me. I don't want to be doing anything else. I don't want to be talking. Like my wife always wants to talk when I'm doing my like dental hygiene stuff, and I'm just like, I can't talk. I have stuff in my mouth. I don't want to do any of that. So Cam
Yeah.
is just very deliberate about how
Oh
he
my
cleans his
god.
teeth. That's kind of what
No.
I'm saying.
There's a gap of time. There's like a pause of time
Hmm.
between when he's flossing and his expression of like these kids. It's not just the flossing. But I really like that you're like, no, Cam just he really cares about the health of his
Dental
enamel
hygiene.
and gums,
I
right?
do think it is completely psychotic to floss in the morning. Like I don't know what the purpose of that is.
Yeah, that's
Um,
useless.
why would you like floss before you go to sleep at night, or floss before
Yeah.
you brush your teeth at night? Like what is going
See,
on? Like did he
it's
eat something?
almost like he's using flossing as an excuse to not talk to his children. Or they already, like, had breakfast. Or no, they
Hmm.
don't have breakfast yet, right? So, yeah, no, this is psychotic for sure.
Uh, so I think it's ambiguous whether or not Cam
Mhm.
knows that his children are not his. But
Yeah, I
in any
don't think it's
case, yeah,
definitive. I
yeah,
just
yeah.
think, again,
There's,
it's like another layer.
agreed. There's tons of purpose stuff that is left purposefully ambiguous for the listener or reader or watcher to decipher for themselves. At breakfast, Harper calls Cam an idiot, and that's when Ethan is like, something happened between you guys.
Yeah.
Uh anyway, there is a long confrontation between Ethan and Harper where she finally tells Cam about all the stuff, all the sketchy stuff that happened between her and Cam, touching her leg at dinner. They got to the suites, he tried to kiss her, but it was nothing. Do you so
Well, they
this is another.
did kiss, right? Not just he
Yes.
tried to kiss her, they did
Yes,
kiss.
he kissed her, and that's
Yes.
what Ethan interrupted the other day. Um
Yes.
then Ethan's like, "You know what? That's not satisfying enough. Like you were gone for like 10 minutes. That couldn't have been just a kiss. Other
Right.
stuff was going on."
Right.
Um and then he gets really upset. I guess from my perspective, it is left ambiguous what actually happened. Like,
Well, and what's interesting to me is that not only is he like, there were 10 minutes, you clearly did something else, he immediately jumps to thinking that she performed oral sex on Cam,
mhm,
which is such a like weighted thing in terms of like sexual power dynamics and
mhm,
like
mhm,
servicing another person and like the intimacy of that and all of this. So it's almost like he went to the thing that he would think would offend him the most,
mhm,
potentially give Cam the most power, and somehow like demean Harper. It's like
mhm.
all very messy and not good. But yeah, he essentially is like rabid. He like refuses to believe what Harper is saying.
Yeah, I interpreted that as I think that's a great point. And I'm not disagreeing. I think I'm adding on that like um he doesn't think they had sex because he knows that that would be like probably something Harper wouldn't do. So he's trying to think of like, well, what are other things that they could have done that would also be extremely offensive to me, you know?
But in all of his imaginings, he does imagine them having sex.
Right, but I think at
Yeah.
that point Harper has already said like they didn't have sex, you know. So I think
Okay.
he's trying to like take her at her word, but like
Mhm.
wait, that's not quite explain it. Like if she's telling the truth, how could she be? What is she omitting? Basically, you know, is kind of
Okay.
how I interpreted that.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
um anyway, Ethan then says, "Whatever, it doesn't matter. Like he still tried to have sex with you, and I'm still really pissed about it." So then
Right.
he storms into the other room. I love that Daphne's just like, "What's going on?" You know, she's completely oblivious to what's happening.
Daphne truly the MVP of this season.
She is absolutely incredible, which we'll discuss momentarily. But anyway, he goes down to the beach and they have a fight.
Yeah.
And Cam just acts like completely. He is he acts from freaking flossing his teeth first thing in the morning to accosting Ethan and Harper at dinner later that night, and giving a toast and showing up super nice looking with cuts on his face. Cam acts psychotic the entire episode, and
Cam
I
is
think
amazing.
it's amazing. It's
It's amazing.
incredible.
Right.
It is truly unhinged behavior
Mhm.
all episode.
See, you know what's funny is that I wouldn't call it unhinged at all. I'd call it like very in control of who he
Mm,
is. Like
mm,
I think his way of dealing with this situation is just pretending that it's completely unimpactful. They had a wonderful vacation. They didn't try to kill each other at the beach, right? I mean, again, it's just sort of it's so clear that Daphne and Cam like get through their relationship and just treat the world as levels of compartmentalization. So you're going to have a great life if nothing actually bothers you.
That's one interpretation.
Well, think about what Daphne and Cam say that
Well,
like they don't watch the news, like
hold on. Another
okay.
interpretation. Another interpretation is that this is actually what gets them off. Like
Yeah, I think right, I think it's
this
both.
this whole situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Not necessarily. I'm not necessarily disagreeing, but like this stuff where they go in and like fuck with other people's marriages. Like that's
Mhm.
actually like the excitement for them. You know.
Mhm.
Um. So anyway,
They
so
have this terrible
it
fist fight, yeah.
it is unhinged to a normal, regular person, an average bystander might consider it unhinged. But I agree with you. I don't think like Cam is out of control or anything like that.
Yeah,
Like
no, no, no.
he knows everything he's doing. But I'm just saying,
It's
literally, to
inexplicable. Yeah, from the
yeah,
outside, it's
for an
like
outside
inexplicable
perspective, yeah, that's what I'm
behavior.
saying.
Yeah.
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 So I guess it's a philosophical question, Roxana. Is to the unhinged. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
For the unhinged people, like, do they think they're unhinged? Then probably not.
No.
So
Cam thinks they're friends. When right before Ethan punches him in the face, right? Cam's like, "We're friends."
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So Ethan ends the conversation by ultimately saying, Cam tried to have sex with Harper. They have a fist fight.
Mhm.
And then Cam kind of has this laughter while he's floating in the water, which again, I just think is like very American Psycho-esque.
Love
Um,
it.
so Ethan runs into Daphne on the beach, who tells him that we can't ever really know someone. We talked about this last night. It's a great
Mhm.
quote. It's also kind of a almost a reference to a Miller's Crossing line that you pointed out
Mhm.
on last night's podcast episode. Um, Megan Fahey is incredible this season. Lots of people are saying this scene was awesome, and I think
Mhm.
she is so good in this scene. You're watching all these emotions play out across her face, but she's still in control. She's maybe angry, she's maybe jealous, but at the end of the day, she's like, I'm making a plan. I'm sticking with it. Let's go, Ethan. You want to go? Let's go. Um, so then they go to this. I don't remember what it's called, like the little island
Yeah, I
villa or
don't
whatever.
remember if it's the island that Quentin was telling
Yeah, I,
Tanya
I think
about.
it is. I think it
Okay.
is. But
Okay. Yeah,
uh,
they walk across this sandbar to this island.
right, and it's done in like ultra slow motion, very ponderously, very like, ooh, something going on here. What's going
Mhm.
on?
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's an open question of whether something happens. Um, That night, we see Harper crying at the table with Ethan. They're sitting in silence. Cam and Daphne join Ethan and Harper for dinner, which Harper's shocked by. Again,
So
psychotic behavior from both
chaotic.
of them. Yeah,
So
chaotic. Great,
chaotic.
great, great definition.
Yeah.
And Cam and Daphne lead a toast to the vacation, talk about how amazing it was and how they're going to go um, vacation again. I saw some chatter online last night that the most unrealistic thing about the White Lotus season 2 is that these two characters went to Yale and that subject never came up before
That
tonight's
they didn't
episode.
talk about it before. Right. Yeah. Yes. Cam and
um,
Ethan. At least Cam would have been like, "Remember back at Yale?" Yeah.
and yeah, Cam says, Harper, it has been fantastic to finally get to know you properly. What's he talking about?
I love him. You know what? That's where I end this season. That they're my favorites actually.
Yeah, you love Cam. Continue to have disdain for Alby.
It's
Roxana.
true.
I
It's
well,
true.
here's what I think I'll say is that Cam is fully who he is, I guess, and like you see his true colors this season. And I think you could say that the same is not necessarily true of Alby, and I will
Yeah.
sympathize with that.
Well, I just think that as a character, Cam is great because he just doesn't care about how
Hmm.
he's perceived, right? So it's very interesting. Again, I'm a little bit confused about like the Bernie Madoff stuff. Like how much of these things that now seem like throwaway lines about people we were supposed to think of as like long-term story plots. But ultimately, I just am very amused by how terrible the two of them are. And I think their performances are so good that
Yeah.
they're solid to watch.
Um, we do see Cam pay back Lucia this
Yes.
episode, so it kind of like I had a theory like maybe Cam has no money, and
I think that was a
I
prevailing theory for a lot of people. That's why he
yeah.
invited them on the trip.
Right. I think
Right.
it was left ambiguous until the very end, which is another
Mhm.
thing. I was just like, that's a very subtle one. There was no like
Mhm.
dialogue about does Cam have no money? Like it was
Mhm.
kind of one you could just think about, and I like that they kind of resolved it by the end. It
Mhm.
does seem to show that Cam actually does have money and so on.
Right.
That's not an area the show wanted to explore. Um, Back in the room, Harper asks Ethan, "What's going to happen to us?" And then they start having sex,
Mhm.
and it's shot very exuberantly and beautifully. And Ethan Ethan kind of knocks over the statue from the first episode,
Yeah, they
the
break
Moore's
the
head
Moor's
sculpture.
head, which had been used for B-roll over and over.
And do you remember what the story around that was? By the way.
Yeah, I mean, the Moor's Head story is that there was like a Moorish man who fell in love, I think, with a Sicilian woman, and she learned that he was like married, so she beheaded him for having turned her like into the other woman and having her like, do sinful things when he was lying to her, and then she like uses his head as like a planter. So it's very much again, it's about like infidelity, revenge, like the specter of masculinity, all that stuff.
Well, it's a story about somebody rejecting like infidelity being framed in an evil way. Like
Mhm.
this guy wasn't loyal to his wife and therefore got his head cut off, right? Am I right about
Right.
that? Yeah.
Infidelity is something I think that, like,
Is
harms the
undesirable.
right, and, like, harms the woman in particular because of, like, the social effects of a woman being involved in infidelity versus a man.
But they shatter that Moore's head,
Yep.
and it turns out for Harper and Ethan's relationship, maybe infidelity might be just what the doctor ordered,
Yeah.
Roxana.
I mean, it's sort of like a did Cam and Daphne make a version of themselves, essentially,
I
through
mean,
Ethan and Harper.
So the next day at the airport, Cam and Daphne are cuddling, and um, Daphne caressing his bruised eye, and they kiss. And Harper and Ethan are laughing together, and they're content. And so I think like that's the story. But let's.
Mhm.
And I saw some people interpreting it as like Cam was not as happy, but I don't know if I agree with that.
Mm.
Um, but let's talk a little bit about what actually this plot line is trying to say. I
Mhm.
mean, do you have any thoughts on whether Ethan and Daphne did something or slept together? I mean, I think the implication is that whatever happened between Ethan and Daphne, it
Mhm.
whether it was sexual, it probably was some kind of sexual, like we don't know,
Mhm.
but that it was enough for Ethan to regain his confidence back and be attracted to his wife again. I I think you are right. The term you have kept using this season is gender essentialism,
Mhm.
and I feel like that's really accurate because I just don't know that we have enough about Ethan from the dialogue that
Mhm.
makes me buy this whole Ethan subplot. And I know people. I brought this up. I brought this up on the episode, and people like wrote in and they're like, "You didn't remember the thing," and it's like, yeah, I brought up the conversation they had in the vineyard.
Right. I
Ethan had in the
remember the
vineyard with
mimetic desire thing,
the
right.
mimetic desire and Cam like wanting to date girls that Ethan date. Like I
Yeah.
specifically mentioned that when we talked about the Ethan thing. Um, but in order for me to believe this whole thing would happen with Ethan, you need to believe he's like a very jealous and controlling person, or that he has a big chip on his shoulder about Cam, and that he has not changed since college. That's my problem, right? It's like, oh, I guess the stuff that happened in college is still a common dynamic now, right?
Right.
And it's like, do we have enough information to know that it hasn't changed since college? Not until he suspected that Harper was cheating. And that's ultimately my problem with the Ethan storyline is like we don't get enough time with Ethan to really make this all make sense, other
Mhm.
than this one conversation they had in the vineyard about like how they used to be in college. And maybe you're just supposed to take a lot from the casting of Ethan and Cam as like,
Right.
oh, here's like conventional alpha male, and here's like I think he's part Asian, Ethan, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, and therefore like a wilting flower compared to Cam. And it's like I just don't. I
Mhm.
don't like that we need to lean on, like, I guess our my supposition my position is that the show makes us lean too much on our unspoken biases about these characters to
Mhm.
really have this plot line with Ethan's jealousy be fully satisfying. Like,
Mm.
him now having something over Harper and Cam, that's the thing he needed to unlock his desire for his wife. Like, I just don't think the show has given us enough for that. That's my
Mhm.
like Ethan has such confidence issues. And that's why he wasn't attracted to his wife, or that's why he couldn't have sex with his wife. Um, it's pretty unsatisfying to me as a story. Uh, but I did think, Daphne and Megan Faye's performance and like her arc is like fully realized and awesome. The idea that like she's like, okay, I'm gonna do whatever it takes to preserve my life. Like, that's amazing, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the Ethan stuff, didn't love how it all played out. What do you think?
No, I mean, that's basically exactly where I am. And I think we talked about this last episode. That last episode sort of felt like there should have been another episode between 5 and 6. And I sort of wonder now maybe if there should have been another episode between 6 and 7. I'm not saying like the season should have been 9 episodes, but it feels like there was something more needed for Ethan and Harper in particular to feel more like specific people and not just like the worst inclinations of a straight man, right?
Yeah.
And sort of like the worst inclinations of a straight woman. There's something just about the dynamic of like the cheating and the lying and the, I don't know, assumptions and all of that stuff that just felt very broad and not necessarily unique to the characters as they were depicted to us. And maybe that's why like I have enjoyed Cam and Daphne more because Daphne has had a very interesting arc, right? I mean, like with Daphne, we've got so many different explanations about how she lives her life and what sort of like personal bargains she's made with herself to stay married to this wealthy man who she knows cheats on her. There's like a lot of backstory for Daphne's actions. And even
Yeah.
with Cam, I think he is a recognizable, like, asshole bro type, right? To like call upon bro code and to just very casually use these sex workers and like whatever. But like you said, he feels like fully realized in a certain way. I understand that Ethan and Harper are characters who come to us at the cusp of transformation and they clearly are unsure of their marriage and they don't know where they stand and all of that. I just don't really buy where they end up. And I just needed like a little bit more, I think, about how each of them turned to their actions. Like, I still don't really buy that Harper would have even gone up to the room with Cam. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like, I still don't
Yeah.
really accept that.
It really, I think the show really makes you lean on like the actors
Yeah.
and their chemistry with each other, to
Mhm.
like make, but it's not, I don't think it's there in the script, in my opinion.
I just
Like,
think that this series.
you're supposed to look, in my opinion, you're supposed to look at Cam and look at Ethan, and then you, the viewer, are constructing the story. And
Mhm.
I don't like, I think that's kind of like lazy, in my opinion. I'm
Well, I
not
just.
against good casting, but like, I just think you don't want to make all these assumptions about who these, you don't like, we as people should try to fight against our unspoken assumptions, not play
Sure.
into them. And that's what the show does. And by the way, this is probably a good time to bring up the Valentina and Mia storyline,
Well, can I
because
just say one thing
yeah,
before we
go ahead
get there?
please, Roxana.
I mean,
Yep.
I think we have also talked about this before, is that it feels like a formatting issue for this season because the entire point of the season, right, was to inject ambiguity and to force us as viewers to decide what happened, what didn't happen, things were off screen, things were implied. And there's part of me that can accept that in terms of, did Ethan and Daphne really sleep together? Did Cam and Harper do more than kiss? Like, I sort of buy that inscrutability for certain plot details. but I don't like it for character development. And I think that's where we're like falling down. Like, I don't think either of us has a problem with not knowing the exact details of their sexual encounters. I think our problem is how these characters reacted to that narrative ambiguity, right? Like, it feels like there should have been more
Yeah.
depth to the characters themselves.
Yeah. I would completely agree there.
Yeah.
So, um,
And so then
okay.
that takes us to Valentina and Mia.
Yeah. And I think that if I'm trying to give the show the benefit of the doubt,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that benefit of the doubt is then taken away when I look at the Valentina and Mia storyline, because
Mm-hmm.
basically, like, what happens with Valentina and Mia is, there's a very embarrassing situation where Valentina can't find her underwear the next morning, and like
Mm-hmm.
housekeeping interrupts her. It's like an employee of hers that interrupts her,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, Valentina basically becomes like a much nicer person.
Right.
All all
Yes.
she all she needed all she needed was to get laid,
Right.
Roxana. And like that's a very male gazy, like retrograde. How many times have we heard like, oh, like so and so's like a frigid bitch and like she just
Mm-hmm.
needs to get laid? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like plays into that stereotype, which is just like, yes, she's gay or at least bi in the show, but like it's still a fairly simplistic and arguably offensive characterization of this person. I don't know. What do you think?
I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, I can definitely see the validity of that. That
Mm-hmm.
suddenly now that she has had like one sexual encounter. I will say that I think we're supposed to think of Valentina as like a little bit more sympathetic than that, right? Because like we saw how isolated she is, like we saw how lonely she is. I think it's less about she is somebody who is like used to sexual activity, and
Mm-hmm.
so now she
Mm-hmm.
has to have it. Like, I think we're supposed to see it a little bit differently from like Ethan's reliance on porn. But I do agree with you that on a certain level, Valentina and Alby have the same storyline, which is that they both become like more confident and sure of themselves and comfortable in their own skin
Mm-hmm.
after having these sexual encounters with these two young Machiavellian sex workers. And yeah, there's something about that that I'm like, ugh, again, like, I don't know. It just felt sort of hollow to me. But I think that's where we end it, right? Like, I don't actually remember, and forgive me for this, but I don't remember if Valentina knows that Mia is a sex worker. I mean, I know they go into like the bargain of if I sleep with you, then you should give me this job. But I don't remember if Valentina knows like the degree to which, like, yes, she's seen Mia and Lucia together. She knows that like she's the guest of Dom. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't know how much we're supposed to take this as like Mia is now stringing along Valentina, or if Valentina is like eyes wide open going into a further partnership with her. I don't know.
I
So,
think
something.
so. There's a scene where Mia says, "Hey, you should get an actual lesbian to
Right.
be, to be with you."
Hmm.
And I think Valentina is stunned in a variety of different ways. Like,
Right.
I think like part of her was like, "Oh, I thought like we actually experienced some real emotional connection last night, maybe,"
Right.
or
Right.
"I thought you actually were a lesbian. Like, you convinced
Hmm.
me." Like that's what my interpretation of
Okay.
Valentina's shock was.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but also, I think Valentina kind of accepted. She wasn't like angry. She didn't fly into a rage when she made these realizations. She kind of accepted that um, it's okay. Like it's okay because Mia is still going to be with me. She says like, "Hey, we'll still hang out tonight," and she's like, "Oh, that's still. I'm still going to get kind of what I want slash need
Right.
regardless."
Right.
Um,
And that's her
so
prerogative too, right? I mean, like, if that's what Valentina wants, then like that's what Valentina wants, which was the argument that we had made with like, or that I had made with like the Alby Lucia scenario, which is like Dom should not tell Alby if Alby just wants to be with Lucia anyway. So I'm not necessarily trying to um like be contradictory. I was just trying to figure out the details of like what is this dynamic now? Like, where
yeah,
do
yeah,
we leave it?
yeah. And I would say my guess is that Valentina is basically more aware of what her own needs are, right?
Mhm.
And
Okay.
that is a better place for her.
Okay.
More aware of her own needs and willing to like express them to the world in some fashion. That's kind of my perspective.
So she became
Um,
a better person.
mhm,
To go back
mhm.
to your point of like all she needed to do was get laid.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I can sort of see a little
But
bit
you're
of like
you brought up a great point about like yeah, she is a more tragic figure
yeah.
than that, like um but it doesn't seem like that plot line doesn't seem particularly nuanced to me personally.
No, I haven't loved it and I don't end up loving it. No.
She does fire Giuseppe, which is pretty brutal. But
Yes.
maybe Giuseppe shouldn't have been trying to have sex with someone at the hotel. In the hotel, in
I
some.
guess, but that's literally what Valentina does, right? Like literally in the hotel. Like I almost feel like I
But
don't know
it's
if this is
bad
a
if a guy
stretch.
does it. Okay, anyway,
Right.
go
I
ahead.
almost feel like Mike White saying this is like hashtag feminism, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in one reading, we would see this as like a triumph for Valentina because like she's getting what she wants. She's like putting this man in his place, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, she is doing exactly what he did.
Yeah.
She just happens to be a woman who is doing it. So,
It's messy. Feminism can be messy, I think is what the show is trying to say.
no, I think the
Um
show is just saying that humanity is messy.
I know. I'm being
Yeah.
facetious. Because you're
Yes.
right. Like
Yeah.
ultimately it doesn't really feel like a super coherent worldview about, you
No.
know, abusing workers or using your power to get hotel resources or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, uh so yeah, didn't love the subtlety or lack thereof in that plot line, and I feel
Hmm.
like that kind of is there to the lack of subtlety is there to a lesser extent in the Ethan Harper storyline.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I also wanted to point this out about the Ethan Harper Daphne Cam storyline, Roxana, which is you were saying how like Daphne has a great arc this
Hmm.
season. I don't think she has a great arc. I think we as the audience have a great arc with her.
Okay.
Like we
Interesting.
discover lots of things about her that make her more interesting,
Hmm.
and we go through a journey. But like, I don't think Daphne changes really at all. Like, she came into
No, I think that's fair.
yeah, like wanting and the people, arguably the people that are supposed to have the arc, which is Ethan and Harper, like Cam, I don't think changes at all this season.
No.
But the people that are supposed to have an arc, Ethan and Harper, um, their arc was of mixed success storytelling wise, according to us,
Yes, I
and
think their arc
they're
basically
supposed to
pushes
change. Yeah.
them yeah, basically pushes them into a place that neither of us totally was convinced by.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Um. Final plotline.
Wait,
Tanya Quint.
should we add that Mia and Lucia just, like, walk off into the sunset, and that felt sort of like, okay,
Yeah, and
shrug.
it's clear that Lucia and Alessio
They were
are
in
like
on it
friends. They're
together.
in on it together. Everything's great,
Yeah.
and uh, they got one over on the rich people. The way I'm reading the season, Roxana, is um, capitalism that produces these millionaires and billionaires. Um, it can't be stopped, and it's incredibly unjust, and often results in people from lower classes being oppressed and or killed. The best you can do is hope to extract some of that sweet, sweet wealth for yourself. That's kind of how I read that closing scene. Is like these people are victorious not because they upended the roots of capitalism, but because they were at least able to get their bag. Uh, that's my interpretation. Any
I
thoughts?
I guess. But I feel like if you watched this season of this show, and the White Lotus keeps saying it's an anthology, right? So if you watched this season on its own, I don't actually know if that messaging comes through. I think it comes through for us in the context of season 1, where we saw like rich people get away with whatever they want and there was more of like a specific classist discussion. It feels like we're putting that on season 2 when I don't think the writing around those concepts was as clear. And I
Mm-hmm.
also think that you could read this second season as like, wow, Americans shouldn't travel internationally because like foreigners are really bad, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody who is a villain in this season is a non-American
Well, other than Greg, but
other than Greg. But like Greg doesn't do the dirty work, right?
mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know. I feel like we're sort of putting that anti-capitalist
Well,
read on this
but
season.
but Roxana, I do think it's reasonable to like for a show to build on itself. Like, Like
But then it shouldn't call itself. Then it.
was The Wire in season 2 like not like The Wire in season 1 was about the drug war, and The Wire in season 2 was about like the working class, and The Wire in season 3 was about
Right.
teacher or
But
you
that's
know.
about like the interconnectivity of a city. There are numerous shared characters. It's not just one shared character. It is about like a specific ecosystem in which myriad parts are failing, but they're connected by location and by
Mhm.
like a failed sense of the American promise to its citizens. I think we're just saying that like rich people are the are the guiding theme of the White Lotus, and I just think that's too broad,
Mhm.
especially if your ideology is that the status quo does not change, which is that what both seasons have done, right? The status quo does not change.
First of all, I'm just so impressed that you can like articulate such a beautiful summation of the Wire's themes just off the cuff. It's nicely
It's my
done.
favorite show. So, yeah.
um and that's a fair point, Roxanne. You know,
Yeah, but I think
I
you're
don't
right
agree.
too.
I
Like,
think the White Lotus as a locus of rich people activity is sufficient for
mhm,
me to like
mhm,
contain, you
mhm.
know, the scope of the show, but I understand if it's not for you, you know.
Yeah,
But for me it's reasonable for like Mike White to say, okay, I made the points around capitalism the
right.
first time, like that is now like the setting under which this second story takes place, you know, like
Mhm,
that to me is a very reasonable thing for a storyteller to do. But
mhm.
I understand if it wasn't fully satisfying for you. It's just
Yeah,
like for me it works, but
yeah. Uh,
it barely works, you know.
yeah.
It's
Have you
because yeah, go ahead.
Did you hear about what the 3rd season is gonna be about?
Yeah, why don't we talk about that at the end?
Yeah,
Let's save that
okay.
for the, or
I'm
maybe for the
curious
bonus
about that.
episode.
Yeah, yeah, but let's end on the most climactic
Yeah.
storyline.
So that morning, Tanya wakes up again wearing her floral mini dress that is the same one that the Apollonia dummy was wearing.
Mhm. Or at least similar, highly similar.
Um, Side note, by the way, you know, just an extremely random side note. You
Mhm,
remember how like I wanted to bring this. This is a really random note, but like,
mhm,
you know how Ethan has like these visions of his wife having sex with Cam.
mhm.
Um, I was like, wow, it's so weird that the show is willing to show us these like visions like happening in like diegetically like in the location, but it needed to construct this whole other reason to show us the Godfather footage. Remember
Mhm,
that? It's like,
mhm.
oh, these people are watching the Godfather at the gift shop. It's like,
Yes.
but you were willing to show us this dream sequence. Like, what if you just cut to B-roll of the Godfather? Couldn't we have just been like Bert was imagining it? Anyway, really random. It's just
Well,
weird what shows will think is important and what's not. Anyway,
and Bert is watching The Godfather at the hotel, which is what
yeah.
inspires him to, like, do the whole
So
tourist thing. Yeah,
he's
I can.
thinking about it, and then we're anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I respect it. I respect that they did the Godfather gift shop thing. Okay.
Mhm,
Portia's still missing. We cut to Portia and Jack. It's clear that he took her phone and is lying about it. There's this
mhm.
really tense moment where he's like, "Don't worry about it," and he puts his arm over her like even more. Portia acts like a fucking moron this entire episode, in my opinion. Like, I don't necessarily believe in stranger danger, but like
Mhm.
he's throwing off red flags left and right. Like if she died, she deserved to die. Basically, that's kind of how I don't like to victim blame here, but like there's so many opportunities where she should have gotten the fuck out of there where she
Yeah.
didn't. Like, I'm like, oh, is he like literally? I was like, is Jack literally going to choke her to death right now on the bed? That's what I
Right.
thought.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, you survived that, Portia? Get the fuck out of there! Like that's kind of my
The
reaction.
thing that was infuriating to me, I completely
Yeah.
agree. I agree with you on both counts. On the one hand, I was like, "God damn it, Portia." On the other hand, I myself have been in a scenario which was, a dangerous scenario for me, and I thought that I would react in one way, and then in the moment when it was happening, I completely abandoned all the ways that I thought I would react, and I did not react in a way that necessarily was, like, I don't wanna say smart, but I didn't react in the way that I would have thought I would in, like, a situation where, like, danger and violence was, like, threatened against me. So I totally understand sort of, like, not knowing how to immediately react in that kind of scenario. But it's now been, like, a day and a half. When Jack goes to, in his own words, "take a shit," she should have just taken the phone
Just
and run
run
away.
away,
Run away.
run away.
Run away.
Y-
Like,
I would agree. I would agree with you. Like in the moment, like when, if Cam and Daphne accost you at dinner, you might not want to like, end that dinner immediately. I get
Right.
it. I get social pressure. I get it. But like, it's a series of red flags. And then the scene that just was completely unforgivable to me is she gets in the car and is like, "So am I being kidnapped?" It's
I
like,
know.
why would you
I
have that
agree.
conversation in the car? Like,
I agree.
have it in a public place. It
Right.
just is.
And I don't think if Portia, like, yes, Portia is like aimless and sort of like ditzy and sort of like loosey goosey, but there was like a staggering disregard for her own survival in
Yeah.
that scene where I was like, this man has done everything he could to threaten you. Like, just run away.
Yeah,
Yeah, I did not. Yeah.
he's like, "Well, you can't afford a cab to the hotel." It's like,
Why are
I
we
have a
still with
feeling
him?
I have a
Yeah.
feeling she can find the money.
Yes.
Like, I have a feel
Also, there are like a lot of other tourists in this area, right? We've seen other English speaking tourists. Take Jack's phone and run and find someone and be like, I'm in danger. Can
yeah,
you please help me?
yeah.
Like, I don't
I
know.
I I
Maybe
think,
that's expecting too much from strangers, but I didn't understand like staying within like visual sight of him.
I think every individual decision, like, viewed independently, I could understand. Like, oh,
Mhm.
you're in bed with Jack, and he's like, "Yeah, your phone," and then first of all, she's like voicing over her thoughts. What the fuck are you doing, lady? Like, if you think like, "Hey, it's really suspicious, I don't have my phone," like, don't say that out loud. You don't want him to know that you think that. None of her behavior makes any sense to me in this episode.
No. But and then the
So,
other thing too that I
but yeah, go ahead.
well, just the last thing I'll say again is like, I don't know how much we're supposed to perceive Jack as a threat either, because I do think that he was supposed to kill her. But
Yeah.
then there's part of me that's like, then why are you just like actually spending the day with her? Like,
I,
I
I
don't
actually I actually don't like,
think
my
he was supposed to
interpretation is
kill her.
not that he was going to kill her. Like,
Okay.
I actually think it was a loose end that so yeah, the question is, Roxana, which way was this plot line dumb? Was it
Mhm.
that he was supposed to kill her and he didn't,
Mhm.
or that he wasn't supposed to kill her and then Quentin like purposely left a loose end?
Right.
Like, I don't know what was going on there, but
And how
um
dumb did they think she was? Cuz she does figure it out pretty easily. Yeah, not great.
it's very silly. And so anyway, I was gonna say, like, every individual decision she makes, like, viewed in out of context, like, kind of I could justify, but the totality of the decisions, like, you know, not realizing something's wrong, not getting out of when he's taking his morning piss, not like running away in
Mhm.
the hotel, at the place when he's taking a shit, not running away, basically not taking advantage of his bodily functions more is kind of
Mhm.
what I'm saying, to run away when he has, like, getting in the car with him, like, all this.
And
Don't
in
go to a
season
secondary location with this character. Like,
And
what are
in
you doing?
season 1, a lot of people, like, ragged on Paul right? It was Paula who, like, helped plan the jewelry scheme,
Mhm.
and a lot of people ragged on, like, did she really think $75,000 would be enough to hire a lawyer to sue the resort to get Kai's, like, family land back? And there's a lot of criticism of that, but I'm like, maybe Mike White just doesn't, like, think that,
He
like,
just thinks young
millennial and
women
Gen
are
Z
dumb, I think.
women yeah, maybe we're just stupid, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, I say that somewhat facetiously, but I do think that yeah, Portia
No,
makes
yeah.
a lot of choices that don't make sense.
I would agree that, that is unfair to, like, completely pin on Mike White,
Yes.
but it
Although he did
certainly
write
is.
and direct every episode, so isn't that unfair?
Yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, like, he's also, like, I thought the character of Daphne was really excellent, like, it's not
But
like he's.
Daphne's, like, 10 years older, right?
Yeah.
Whereas it's like Lucia, Mia, Portia,
Teenage and
Paula
20-year-old women,
yeah,
basically,
he's
yeah,
like,
is yeah,
"Ugh, gross."
yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so
Okay.
that's the Portia stuff. Should we get into the Tanya stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, but we should point out that Quentin is acting super sketchy, like, the whole time.
Whole time.
If there's a lot I've seen a lot of people question online, like, this seems like an extremely elaborate scheme for
Oh my
Greg to
god.
murder Tanya.
So elaborate.
Really, I actually think it's completely fine, because what do they expect? Like,
Well, I mean elaborate in terms of time. It seems like there's, like, a lot of dead time where we
Mhm.
don't like, are they literally just, like, sitting around at the dinner table staring at each other in silence? like we've talked about how like the structure of this season is that each day is an episode.
Yeah.
A lot of times we start in the morning and then skip to the evening without a sense of like what happened during the day. So I only mean it's elaborate in that I don't understand how they're like entertaining her this whole time.
Yeah. But yeah, it would make sense for like Greg to want to have these people do a murder on her.
Right. Quickly.
Uh, but there's so many things about it that are really, really weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, if they're going to do a murder on her, maybe Quentin shouldn't have a photo of Greg in his room. Like, that feels like a pretty big oversight. Um, when she discovers, so I actually took my Google Translate app up to the speaker
Mm-hmm.
on the TV and tried to have it translate what Niccolo says to Quentin on the boat.
Okay.
And the translation that I got was something along the lines of, "I think it's time for me to go. Let me sort out my things." That's what the Google
Okay.
Translate said to me. I don't know if it's
Okay.
accurate, and it might have picked up background. Who knows? But and he gets up and he goes and he has a bag, and then Tanya gets the bag, and it has the most comedically obvious kidnapping things ever.
It's like when
Um,
you watch a Dateline episode and they're like, yes, a wife went missing, and the husband the day before went to Walmart and paid with a credit card to purchase a shovel and rope and duct tape and a gun. It's like literally that level.
uh, yeah, I hope he didn't buy all those things in one store. Is all I'm gonna
Yeah,
say
right.
about that.
Yeah.
But what was the plan, Roxana? Like, I'm pretty sure prenups also have clauses that if you're murdered, it doesn't count.
I
Like,
agree.
Greg
And
doesn't get all the money.
this is
So,
again where this sort of fell down for me.
yeah.
Is like everything about this death was suspicious. Like if they were actually going to use Nicolo's tools of like
Right.
rope and duct tape and a gun,
Are they gonna
that's
kidnap her? Like,
incredibly suspicious.
yeah.
Right. So I
Because they
don't
need you to find the body for,
right.
like, you can't just vanish her.
Right.
So you need to have her have a body. And if you're like tying her up, those things show up in an autopsy. Like, it
Right.
does. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. I completely agree with you. So it's like again, that portion of it did not make a ton of sense to me. Even an accidental death, like the prenup, I think, is going to suppose like a life insurance investigation, right? Because they're going to try to figure out, like, insurance companies don't want to pay out. It's like they don't want
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so a lot of this was just sort of like, is this really how this would have gone down? Unless we're supposed to think that they're morons, that they're absolute morons. And then I feel like the tension of the episode sort of doesn't align with the fact that they're
Mm-hmm.
idiots.
Mm-hmm.
Like I go back and forth on this a little
Yeah,
bit.
because it's so foreboding, the score, which I think is excellent.
Mhm.
It's like has this kind of ambient thrum and rhythmic
Mhm.
thrum, and Quentin saying all these, like, Quentin acting sketchy as fuck.
Hollander's
And
performance is really
yes,
good. His line deliveries are all very like double-edged at one
sinister.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
at one point he's like, "You want to enjoy the Ionian Sea while you
One last
can."
time.
Yeah, right? And yeah, and so there are all these lines and I'm like, "Okay, this is good." But then it's just sort of like, "So what did you guys actually think was going to happen here?"
Yeah.
And
Are we
that's
supposed
why
to think this was a good plan, basically?
right. And
Right.
that's why I do completely understand that people who thought the prenup cheating thing was a little bit more digestible
That was
because
a well executed plan, in
yeah,
my opinion.
because
That part
that
was good.
like you get her to do drugs, you
Yeah.
get her to cheat, you get it on tape.
Yes.
Like I did say
Excellent.
earlier that clearly Tanya would have like lawyered up and contested that.
Yeah.
But that makes more sense to me than like we're going to murder her and somehow Greg is going to get all of her money. Like I don't know how
Well,
that
yeah,
would
so
have
he has, like,
worked.
zip ties, and he has, like, rope and all this fucking
Yeah.
stuff. Now the gun, like, if it had just been a gun, that would've been much more believable to me. Like, but then there's a scene where Tanya basically kills everyone on the boat.
She
I mean,
shoots her way out.
I do wanna say this is a really good like, Megan Fahey and Jennifer Coolidge were MVPs of this episode.
Yes.
Regardless of how ridiculous the plot was, Jennifer Coolidge is wonderful. Like,
We didn't talk about it, but her Coolidge and like Tanya and Portia's phone conversation is so well done because it's all of these Coolidge facial reactions where she's putting together what's happening, right? You get like the Portia reaction to Tanya being like, "Oh yeah, he was fucking his uncle." So you get Portia's like shock at that, and that's a great Coolidge line delivery. And then you get Coolidge's like running through the reactions of like, I do have a bad feeling about this. Like, what is Quentin up to? And that was a picture of Greg, right? So, like, she
yeah.
cycles through all of that stuff really well. And then, yes, she, like, shoots her way out of this bedroom that she's barricaded herself into. She shoots Niccolo, which we see
Well,
first.
there's also this scene where she like loses her phone and then she tries to talk with the older gentleman and she's like, "These gays are trying to kill me," which is like an amazing
Right. And the
line and
captain's like,
delivery.
we're all gay.
Yeah,
So the
and
captain is not helpful.
it's a great sequence. So Coolidge is like, this is like one of my favorite episodes of her this season.
Yeah.
And yeah, then she shoots everyone, and the way it's filmed is really interesting. It's filmed like you're kind of viewing not from her POV, not even a wide shot, but you're like looking at her while she's shooting everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And
Like,
it's
we're
very
facing her, we're very close to her, so like we see her lift the gun and shoot it, but I'm imagining that, like, you know, that was shot with like White moving backward through a hallway or on a dolly or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, so then finally when we see the reveal, she's like killed Didier, she has shot Quentin, Hugo is hiding, and then she asks Quentin, like, was Greg having an affair? Which Quentin dies before answering. So again, leaves Tanya with this, again, the ambiguity, the confusion, the infidelity question. And then do you
Yeah.
want to talk about what ends up happening to Tanya?
Well, she tries to get on a smaller boat to get to shore, and
Nicola's boat.
Nicola's boat. She accidentally slips. I actually watched this scene like 5 times
Mm-hmm.
because I was trying to see like did she hit her head or something on the way
Mm-hmm.
down. But I don't think she hit anything. I think it was added like a sound effect was added to
Oh, I
imply
see.
that she hit something.
Right, because
Or
there
it
is
was
like
like
a thunk.
there's a thunk, and I was like, did it actually show her head making contact with anything? I don't think it did. I think it's like a movie magic kind of thing where anyway, whatever the case, she slips off, she hits herself, and she dies.
Mm-hmm.
I read about Mike White saying she wanted Tanya to have an operatic uh ending.
Right, there's like
Um
Italian opera that's playing during her like drowning, sinking into the water sequence.
yeah. Not he said, quote, "Not that I really wanted to kill Tanya because I love her as a character and obviously love Jennifer, but we're going to Italy. She's such a diva, a larger than life female archetype. It felt like maybe we could devise our own operatic conclusion to her life and story." End quote.
Mm-hmm.
So uh and we discussed last night about like whether we found this to be satisfying,
Mm-hmm.
and like that she would survive, and there is, it's all very Coen Brothers esque that she would survive this entire cockamamie attempt to murder her, and then be felled by like her own clumsiness at the end.
Right. Slip and
Um,
fall off of a boat. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
uh, yeah. I don't know that it's like the ending I would have wanted for Tanya, but I think it's like a very valid, fair ending for the like it
Mm-hmm.
fits in with like some things that we know about the character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but did you ever watch that movie True Lies?
Oh my god, like many, many years ago.
Obviously, parts of it have not aged well.
Uh-huh.
But there is a scene where Jamie Lee Curtis drops an Uzi, and it bounces down the stairs. And like while it's bouncing downstairs, it like goes off and shoots like 10 terrorists.
Mhm.
Um, that's kind of how I felt about this scene with Jennifer Coolidge killing, like expertly killing all these people on the boat. While shakingly nervous, it
Yeah.
felt a little bit. It beggared belief a little bit, but whatever.
But it also
Um,
feels like Tanya would be the person who would, like, go to a shooting range. She feels like that kind of person who would
Okay.
have, like, experience with a gun. But I mean, I liked her
Really?
ending. I thought it made sense to have her
Mhm.
drown, and we've talked about this a little bit before, given that season 1 and the way that season 1 used water was as like, in the way that it's often been used in literature and art, which is, like, rebirth and, like, rejuvenation and restoration. Like, Tanya throwing her mother's ashes into the water was, like, a cleansing, healing moment for her. hilariously played by Coolidge, like running through the surf, but still, right? Like a
Yeah.
moment where we were supposed to actually sort of have sympathy for Tanya and her growth. And then here, the whole season has really played up the menace of like the ocean and the waves, and sort of this place has like a natural aggression to its landscape. And so having her drown, I thought, was a nice way to like link
Hmm.
all of that stuff back together.
Did you see uh first of all, Roxana has written a piece about this at Vulture. I have not had a chance to read it yet,
Yes.
but it's
Yes.
called "The White Lotus's Watery End." We'll link to it in the show notes. Um, did you see there was a reverse shot of water in the
No.
episode?
Oh, yes. Well, there's a
It-
moment in this episode where it's
yeah,
clearly like waves that were shot and then like rewound.
rewound. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had any take on what that was, but um,
Um, well, this might be, again, this is probably too much of a reach, but what I mentioned in my essay is that all of the waves and stuff reminded me of how David Lynch uses wind and like trees in Twin Peaks.
hmm
Because it felt like he was always
hmm
using the B-roll of like the woods to sort of again nod to like there are sinister things happening in nature that don't care about us as people. And the thing that Lynch did, which I'm sure you remember, is that he would like record people giving their lines backward and then rewind them so that they were being said
yeah,
correctly, but like the cadence and the rhythm was weird. So I think just doing things in reverse is like a recognizable way of messing with like our sense of time and reality and adding
hmm
sort of a surreal edge to things that we think we know.
yeah, yeah. Okay, we got to wrap up, even though it feels like we haven't finished talking about everything yet. But
I
I do
know.
want to say, please, if you want to hear our bonus episode where we kind of react to some of the people's reactions to this season, subscribe at decodingtv.com. Um, and I want to just say a big thank you to Roxana again for joining us this season. You know, let's do a quick rundown before we go of like the individual plot lines. Like I thought the Cam and Daphne stuff was awesome this season. Like,
Mhm.
just really great to learn about those characters and how weird and, in my opinion, unhinged they are.
Mhm.
The Ethan Harper storyline had some decent elements about it,
Mhm.
but kind of veered towards this really, you know, thinly written stuff towards the end about this jealousy and, as you said, gender essentialism. I thought that
Mhm.
the DeGrasso stuff was pretty solid throughout, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um, and the Tanya and Quentin stuff, you know, the Quentin plan is silly, but Tanya's performance and also kind of like her fate feels like pretty decent as well. And
Yes.
then Valentina, Lucia, and Mia, not great.
Not
That's
great.
kind of how. So the whole spectrum of reactions to
Mhm.
like this season.
Mhm.
But overall, I had a great time talking about the show with you, Roxana, and I want to
Same.
give a big thank you to you again.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you to everybody's emails. And it was fun. It was a good time.
It was fun. So yeah, there will be one more bonus episode for Decoding TV members, and tune in. Be sure to hear our announcement podcast about The Last of Us, which will be coming in the next couple of weeks. But thanks so much for listening to this season of Decoding TV. Keep it tuned in to podcast.decodingtv.com for more coverage of the greatest TV shows that are on right now. And until next time, we will see you later. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.